Speed. It's an aspect in Battlecast that I think people tend to overlook when judging a unit. Granted, I think most of the things I will talk about is pretty obvious for experienced player, but I find it interesting to talk about anyways. In Battlecats, the speed stat defines the distance traveled by a unit in one frame. Speed divided by half is the amount of distance traveled per frame, so a unit with 10 speed moves 5 range per frame and a unit with 48 speed moves 24 range per frame. Speed I think has some interesting topics to touch on. I will separate the sections based on applications of speed and how it can affect units or battles. First off, I will talk about the simplest application, which is speed on tank units. Tanker units such as Islands, Chimera, Kai, Cat Machine, they are made to take hits and deal damage on enemies that ranged units usually cannot deal with, generally but not limited to enemies with huge range such as Kamel, or wave enemies such as Elizabeth. Higher speed means that the unit will take less hits to reach their target and deal damage to them. It also allows tankers to intercept the movements of LD units faster before they can advance too far, or to tank less shockwave before reaching the front lines. When at the front line, faster tank units are also able to push farther and secure more space for you to work with, and immediately protecting your ranged units that may move too fast for your tanker to protect. I cannot think of any particular situation where having a lower speed on a tanker is preferable. I can only imagine it being possibly bad if the tankers pushes frontline enemies into backliners range, but I also cannot think of a stage where you'd want to bring tankers in these sort of levels at the first place. Perhaps this can apply to tanky Meatshields, but that will be discussed later. Now for speed on ranged, mid-ranger or just general non-tanker units, this is a little bit more complex. Speed on these units can both be a blessing and a curse. Firstly, high speed on mid-rangers is generally good if you want to enter LD. This much should be obvious at least. Units such as Yulala, Saber, Vaulter, or even Seafarer are good examples of this. Fishman, if that counts as a mid-ranger, is even a speedier example. Stages such as Weeping Dunes, No Plan A, False Resurrection, and Snitches Get Stitches are good examples where speed to enter LD is a good thing to have. These also mostly applies to non-damaging units like proc units, for example Bomber Cat and Gift Cats. Bomber has a decent enough speed which allows him to enter Taki's range with a pretty lenient timing and freezing the frontline enemies, and Gift Cat's high speed allows him to enter Lionel's range very easily. Juliet's speed talent also allows her to do the same. However, units with noticeably very fast speed such as Kachiyama, Cosmo, and Fishman has a problem. Their speed will make them stand closer to the enemy than what their standing range actually is. I made an entire video regarding this situation, which I shall link in the description. If you want to learn more regarding this, please give it a watch. Keep in mind when watching that it's something to consider when you want to give Fishman speed up talent. On one hand, higher speed on Fishman means that it can enter LD easier. On the other hand, he would have a worse matchup against Bunbun. Now what about slow ranger units? Slow range units are actually more preferable as generalist if there are no LD or sometimes waves into the equation. Units such as Drama and Camera has noticeably slow speed, which helps a lot in the general cases. To visualize how this extends to their survivability, take a look at Draconian using Cameraman. When utilizing Camera against the others, Camera will survive as long as the others are in the front line. Once the others die though, Camera will walk towards the Manic Dragons. After getting hit and getting knocked back, Camera's slow speed allows her to buy herself time before getting hit by the dragons again. This in turn allows Camera to survive much longer. For this stage in particular, there's not that much advantage for this considering how fast Camera can mow down the others before the next other wave, but I think it's very easy to see where I'm going with this. Point is, low speed means that they won't run into danger and generally would stay on safe zones. It's good for general survivability. That's about it for non-tank speed, I believe. I will now move on to two other things: extremely slow units and extremely fast units. There's not that much extremely slow units in the game. The most noticeable slow units would be Professor Catshops with his 1 speed, or units such as Dioramas and the Ubers in the Nekoluga set, as well as the ones I have mentioned before, Cameraman and Drama. The slowness of these units generally makes them good for start off. If you want to save up for cash and not hit the base early before you're at max wallet while still needing to fend off enemies, slow units such as these would be able to help you clear the enemies without pushing too hard or hitting the base too early. Such an example would be the start off of Floor 29, Close Encounters, or even an Elder Secret. Honestly, there's not that much else to say about extremely slow units. There are other things, but it'll be discussed a bit later. Moving on to super fast units, there are more noticeable examples of them: Ganglion, Fishman, Maglev, Yukimura, Awakened Bahamut, Manic Lion, Lolly Nejar, etc. Units with extremely high speed are generally very easy to time, and they are extremely quote-unquote accurate. What I mean by accurate is how you can pick on certain targets with them. For example, sniping low health Gabriels or Dark Doges using Maglev, or timing Awakened Bahamut to the Aurost in Realm of Carnage. This is extremely useful on Maglev, especially to pick up his double money, or Yukimura to pick up certain black enemies instead of hitting other traits. You're also able to damage enemies that you usually need to tank or require massive rage to hit. Enemies that I mentioned earlier in the tank section, such as Kamel, Master Ray, Crazed Lizard, etc. Their speed allows them to target enemies that are generally hard to reach and contributes well before dying. This, however, is also because the trend of these super fast units having instant attacks. Units such as the Ganglion that needs to charge up doesn't really do this job well. It can still enter LD easily though. These units are also able to trigger bases early, which can be good if you want to lure. Fast, low damage per hit units such as Lion and Manic Lion are also good for stages such as Pixwell, Overachiever Central, and Rickety Coaster, as they can trigger certain waves of enemies without triggering the rest. That should be all regarding super fast and super slow units. Now moving on specifically to Meatshields. Meatshield's speed also matters quite a lot in the aspect. Slow Meatshields are usually not preferred in general as they clock cat limits very easily, so fast Meatshields are usually preferred for generic levels. Not only that, fast Meatshields are also good at entering LD of course, and tanky fast Meatshields such as Manic Eraser can also tank through waves and reach front lines easily, such as in Saber Altar stage. It's also good for timing on waves or Omnistrike enemies such as Hermit, Eulala, Zeruel, or Homolili. However, fast Meatshields aren't always superior against slower ones. In certain stages, there are times where you'd want enemies to not trigger their attack or to not trigger Burrow or to miss their attacks. For example, Dolphinas in floor 35. Generally, you don't want fast Meatshields as it triggers Dolphina early and Dolphina will hit your stack. Utilizing Dark Mitama in NRF works better with slower Meatshields as Dark Mitama is rather slow, and having fast Meatshields would get Dark Mitama hit by a barrage of Dolphinas that attacks because of the fast Meatshields. Aside from LD, preventing Burrow is also another use for slow Meatshields. One of the most popular use of this application is floor 27 and the Haunted One LDK. Using slow Meatshields allows you to still stall Gravy without triggering Haka's Burrow early. This can potentially completely stop Haka from ever burying the entire run while still keeping your units alive. And finally, another application of slow Meatshield that I can think of is to prevent wave attacks. This is most applicable on stages with a mix of wave enemy and other strong enemy that can make the said wave enemy miss. Most examples include Berserkery, but level examples would be Labyrinth of Hades, Ogre Island, Docking Massacre, and Boiling Spring. Slow Meatshields in this stage would generally gets hit by every other support enemies. Fast Meatshields have the tendency to walk into the Cory's attack when he's about to swing his axe. Slower units, however, will usually get hit by every other unit that is not the Waver, as it tends to die farther from Cory. In exchange of the slower Meatshields, you will have a much lower chance of getting wave. That should be all for Meatshields. My last point here would be about a mix of slow and fast units. Slow and fast units in a team sometimes doesn't bode well. On a stage where you would stack units at the start, it can be hard to make a stack of fast units work, especially if the starting peons are limited. If you want to lure, fast units will run off by themselves and the slow units would get left behind. This in turn generally kills off the fast units early as they are not supported by the slower units, be it attackers, proc units, or even Meatshields. Row I think is one big example of this. This is an endgame stage, but it shows the example very well. Pizza is an extremely good attacker for the stage, but due to his extremely slow speed, he won't be able to support any anti-metals you may stack because anti-metals generally move much faster than him. Pizza will usually get left behind. By the time Pizza would get to the front line, your anti-metals would usually already die. It is one of those other reasons why fast Meatshields are important, to catch up with these units. Unfortunately, the only fast Meatshields there are really only Manic Mohawk and Manic Eraser, which, if just the two of them, usually won't be able to stall very well. This problem doesn't happen too often, but it definitely is a thing to keep in mind. Slower units tends to get left behind and get separated by the fast ones. Unit with similar speed tends to have a better synergy. This very concept can actually be used against your enemies. On stages where slow and fast enemies spawn together or just start moving from the same place, It is possible for you to pull the fast units away from the slower enemies by luring and single out the fast enemies by themselves. This will let you to build a stack on the fast enemies or even rush it down before the slower enemies arrive to support it, and this can be disgustingly helpful in certain situations. There are many stages where you can take advantage of this, such as Caliban's Keeper, Greeter at the Gates, Steam to Death, Spy Who Pet Me, and many more. Keep this in mind whenever you see a combination of enemies with differing speed together. This is one of the only applications of taking advantage of knowing enemy speed that I can think of at the top of my head, except for the obvious ones. If there's anything less known that I should have taken note of, please tell me. Another thing, this is combining about both Meatshields and differing speed. This is a trick that I do when you're bringing both speedy and slow Meatshields, which is almost always the case considering both Eraser and Manic Eraser are very staple Meatshields with extremely obvious speed difference. You know how slow Meatshields tend to clock the cat limit, right? Well, fast Meatshields sometimes can also clock their cat limit too. This happens in base hit stages where the starting enemies doesn't give off a fight, but it still stalls you. For example, in floor 21, should you make a stack of units at the start and brings 4 Meatshields to the fray, then spams the Meatshields at the start, what usually happens is that the fast Meatshields tends to get stuck on the peons and won't be able to advance. Sometimes they may also get stuck on bases where they don't have enough damage to trigger the boss early. This in turn will make a huge stack of fast Meatshields that ended up only waiting for the slower but stronger units to clear the peons for them to advance. I see this happen a lot, and it can affect the tide of the battle if your cat limit gets clocked very easily. What you want to do to prevent this is to spawn the faster Meatshields later when you're about to hit the base. Since they're fast, they can catch up from across the map if they're spawned late. So by the time you're about to engage in battle, they're already at the front lines without you spamming it from the very beginning, which prevents the disadvantage of cat limit. A technique with a similar idea can be used against certain LD enemies. Since LD enemies tend to trigger their attack at low range, having spawned slow units first and then fast units later can help in assisting slow units that generally cannot enter LD to slip by. Using fast units early on these LD enemies will result in the slower units getting hit and not being able to enter. Timing the slow units in together with the faster one is the way to go. I actually cannot think of many times where this would be important, as most of the time you either don't have the chance to do that due to peons or there's no importance in bringing certain vital units which happens to be slow to a stage. The only times where I remember this being applied very well is Honey Trap and King of Heroes, as Camera and Thaumaturge works very well for Queen Bee and General Anti-Metals being good in King of Heroes, but they are all too slow to enter the boss's LD in normal situation. Yet another similar application to this is to land some meaningful hits on certain LD or Omnistrike enemies before they can hit you back. The most notable example would be in floor 40. Units such as Manic Island or Can usually cannot hit Eulala reliably under normal circumstances. But if you do not shield and let Eulala move towards your units first, he will engage closer than usual and your melee units would be able to hit Eulala without a problem. This is the very basics of using Balrog in floor 40 too. Players who does this doesn't spawn Meatshields not to show off, but because spawning a Meatshield that outspeeds and moves in front of Balrog would cause Eulala to trigger his attack and hit Balrog early. That are pretty much all I wanted to say regarding the importance and application of knowing speed in the game. It's not super vital, but it's good to know nevertheless. If you want to know more about what I was saying, I also have a video regarding how LD and Omnistrike works, as well as shockwave mechanics, all which I mentioned in this video, and most importantly regarding the effect of speed and range. I will link them all here, check it out if you are interested. For now, I hope this video can somehow aid you in the game, and I hope you enjoy. See you later.